Hello, welcome to another edition of The Debate. I'm Kavit. On the crisis in Ukraine, the country has a new president and prime minister. This is while Viktor Yanukovych has said he was still president of Ukraine. But the crisis in that country is far from over, especially in the Crimea region, home to Russia's Navy fleet. Pro-Moscow gunmen seized control of the parliament and government headquarters. Meanwhile, Russia's military exercises involving some 150,000 troops has drawn a warning reaction from the U.S. to act cautiously, not to take any action on Ukraine that could be misinterpreted. How far will Russia's President Vladimir Putin go to keep Ukraine? Is there a war looming on the horizon? Is the Ukraine crisis reigniting the Cold War tensions and rivalry?
Ukraine in uncharted waters as the swiftly unfolding events there continue to make waves. Tensions are simmering high, particularly in the country's southern Crimea region. On Wednesday, thousands of ethnic Russians demonstrated for independence there before being confronted by rival protesters supporting new authorities in Kiev.
In the Crimea, you have a different ball game. The region has an ethnic Russian majority. It's an autonomous republic. It's recently added to Soviet Ukraine, then Ukraine. And there's obviously a very active Tatar minority which detests ethnic Russians because half of the Tatar population was killed on the way to Siberia in 1944. And so the tensions are high there.
The conflict in the largely pro-Russian autonomous region reached its climax on Thursday after armed men seized government and parliament headquarters in the regional capital Simferopol and raised Russian flags over the buildings. The seizure sparked immediate warning from the interim leader in Ukraine that any troops movements at Russia's Black Sea Fleet based in Crimea would be seen as a military aggression. Meanwhile, Russia has launched large-scale military drills involving most units in central and western regions of the country. Russia's defense ministry has also announced that fighter jets along its western frontier have been put on combat alert while constantly patrolling the airspace over border districts. Washington was quick to react. U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel urged Moscow to be cautious about its military exercises so that they're not misinterpreted.
I expect Russia to be transparent about these activities, and I urge them not to take any steps that could be misinterpreted or lead to miscalculation during a very delicate time.
With Russia and the West pursuing widely conflicting interests in Ukraine, the world is watching where the volatile situation there is headed.
Let me introduce our guest for this edition of The Debate. Ukrainian nationalist Catherine Fedorova joins us from Kiev, and from the Executive Intelligence Review, Edward Spanhaus joins us from Washington. I'd like to welcome both of our guests. Catherine Fedorova, let me start with you. What would you call what has happened in Ukraine? Because some are calling it a coup.
Thanks for having me. I want to say that finally our people are starting to stand up against corruption and against our leaders who have been stealing money for such a long period of time. That's what I want to call this, that this is actually our way of saying that we need to preserve ourselves as a country, as an independent country, our culture, our heritage, and nation. Okay, you call independence there as an adjective. Edward Spanhaus, let's go with that line, and I'd like to find out from you the reaction you have on this new interim prime minister, also the president that has been elected, announced in parliament. Yet you have the old president, Viktor Yanukovych, who said he is still the president of Ukraine and has given a warning that it's illegitimate rulers, that people in the southeastern and southern regions would never accept mob rule.
This is a coup. This is a Western-sponsored coup, particularly the British, NATO, and the United States. No question about it, this was not a peaceful revolution. This was a violent terrorist action, armed guerrillas taking over government buildings. This would never be tolerated in the United States or in Britain or in Germany. But these countries are backing what has become a neo-Nazi coup and which is taking us to the verge of a nuclear confrontation with Russia.
Catherine Fedorova, you heard our guest there in Washington. What do you think?
I definitely do disagree with that. I do agree with the part that maybe this revolution is sponsored. Of course, it's sponsored. In the beginning, it was a fake revolution, but later on, when our protests were peaceful in the very beginning, because I was there. I saw this with my own eyes, how this all turned into a violent revolution. Yanukovych basically paid our police to remove the protests by force, because he didn't want to join the EU or sign an agreement with the EU. And he paid money to beat up elderly people, men, women, children. As you can see, many have died, hundreds have died from this. And they were all peaceful from the very beginning. And then when he paid our police to beat up our people, nationalists stood up, and this became a true nationalist revolution. Some people can claim it's a Nazi revolution, national socialist, whatever you want to call it, but it is a national revolution. It is a national. It's not a national socialist, Nazi. We just want a bright future for our children, and we want our country. We don't want police to beat up their own people in our country. Who wants that? I mean, everybody thinks that there's two options, to join the EU or to join Russia. No, there's a third option about remaining as the country Ukraine, and people need to realize that the option exists, and we need to stick with this option.
Do you realize what's going to happen when you have the IMF, who's going to be in talks now and has been in talks with the new officials there, Catherine Fedorov? What type of strings are going to be attached to a possible loan that's going to be given to Ukraine? Do you realize those strings and how it's going to control your country politically in some ways?
I think we can pick whatever leader we want, but our spirit is supposed to be the leader of our nation. That's what I believe in.
Edward Spanos, I'm sorry to jump in. Let's move on to this warning by the U.S. To Russia. Russia must be transparent about its military exercises along Ukraine's border. And of course, those exercises are huge, 150,000 troops as one example, and not take any steps that could be misinterpreted or lead to miscalculation. Tell us what he means when he says misinterpreted or lead to miscalculation. No, this is for Edward Spanos. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Edward Spanos.
Yeah. Yeah. This is true hypocrisy. This is as if what we're looking at is a Cuba Missile Crisis in reverse. This represents an expansion not just of the European Union, but of NATO right up to Russia's borders. And I think Russia has been quite restrained in their response to this, perhaps because of the Sochi Olympics. But this has been something that's been brewing for a long time. The association agreement would not just destroy Ukraine economically, it destroys its economic sovereignty, its political sovereignty, and it brings it into a defense union with Europe. And of course Russia's reacting. This was the intention, was to get Russia to react.
Well, I'm not too sure what you mean by restraint. These are probably one of the biggest exercises, militarily speaking, that Russia is having, Edward Spanos. And I'm reading here, and I wasn't aware that on Tuesday in the Crimean city of Sevastopol, you have armored personnel carrier and 2 trucks full of Russian troops who made their appearances there on the streets. So they are showing themselves up, aren't they?
Yes, this is within the past 2 days. You've had a neo-Nazi coup underway since the beginning of December, and Russia did not respond. You've got Svoboda, you've got the right faction there, this right sector. These 2 groups are the driving force behind the demonstration. I'm not saying everybody in the demonstration is a neo-Nazi, but the neo-Nazis are the ones who are armed, who have been leading the violence against the government authorities, against policemen, and the takeover of regional parliaments and the Rada. The driving force has been Svoboda. This is a neo-Nazi party. And of course Russia's going to react. I'm surprised they didn't react much sooner.
Yes, some are deducting that too. Catherine Fedorov, I see you smiling there. I assume you have a reaction to him.
Of course I have a reaction, because I have been hearing this for several months, that people are calling this a neo-Nazi thing. Most people don't realize how people live here, because it's easy to judge us and our actions while you're living in another country and you don't have to deal with this sort of corruption. That's the whole point. Excuse me, if you're going to be an elderly person who outlived the war, who outlived the Holodomor, and you have a pension of around $120 per month, I think you would care. I think you would actually be against the government. Who wouldn't be? And we weren't the one who started the violence. People need to realize we were peaceful at first. And another thing people need to realize that the pro-European Union protests, they weren't, to be honest, a pro-European protest. They were anti-Russia, because Russia still, till this day, has a huge influence and control over our country and people. And that's why people are against Russia. And you can see by how people have been basically taking down Lenin monuments as an example that this is more of an anti-Russia thing. The only reason people want to join the European Union because they think that it's going to be better if they join the Union. They think economically we are going to be better, and maybe to some certain extent we could be better, but the European Union would be a cultural downfall for us.
Well, Edward Spanos, let's talk more about the Crimea developments. And I'm looking at what's happening within that region, and that's the protests that have taken place. And the most recent one of significance is the pro-Moscow gunmen who have seized control of the parliament and also of the government headquarters in the capital, and they've raised the Russian flags. Now, do you think that there's going to be a separation in the works there due to the tensions that exist between mostly the Russian nationals there and, of course, the Tatars, as we understand?
Well, of course, it's a very dangerous situation. But as I said, you can't look at just the past 2 days. In here, you've had a neo-Nazi group, the Svoboda, and the right sector, who have been the driving force behind these demonstrations. Russia, I mean, Ukraine, after all, was part of Russia for 1,000 years. This is not, Russia is not some outside force coming in. The real interference has been from the West, going back to the Orange Revolution and up to today. And these people are paid. Look at the Victoria Nuland coming in there. They're trying to dictate the United States. My government should not be doing this. Why are they trying to dictate who the government of a sovereign country should be? There's not supposed to be interference from either side. And you have to go back a couple of months to understand what's happening today in Crimea.
Well, Catherine Fedorov, the threat of a war is a possibility. Do you agree? I mean, this is what has been deducted.
Of course, I agree with.
Yes. There's a comparison made to the Georgia War back in 2008. Go ahead.
Of course, I agree to the possibility that there could be a war, and sadly that there could be a division of Ukraine. And what I would say that in order to understand the whole situation, you don't have to go back 2 months. You have to go back hundreds of years to understand how we have suffered under Russia's control. People don't realize that they try to destroy us as a nation. During the Soviet Union, we weren't allowed to talk, speak, or write in Ukrainian. Everything that had to do with our culture, it was illegal. We weren't allowed to be as a people. We weren't allowed to exist as a nation, basically. And I think every country and every nation deserves to have that right. And I think it's not fair to the millions who have died. And when I mean millions, I mean not only during World War II, but during the artificial famine Holodomor, which has started before the year of 1932, and more than 12 million people have died from starvation from that. And even though we all know who was behind communism and Bolshevism, many Russians helped to help that plan to succeed. And because of all of this, of course, people are going to be anti-Russia and are going to be more pro-European Union than they're going to be pro-Russia.
Okay, let's take a quick time out. Thank you very much for that. Let's take a quick time out and listen to some of the viewer comments as posted on our Facebook page, and then we'll continue with the debate.
Why can't Putin allow Ukrainians deal with their own affairs? Why is he forcing himself on them? What's gone is gone. Ukraine is an independent state and will always remain so. All these came after Putin forced Ukraine to ignore EU and join Eurasia, which Ukrainian masses never wanted. Russia should send their troops to stop the Western imperialists from stealing Ukraine's natural resources, because when nothing is left for them to steal, they will simply abandon the population of Ukraine, and that is a fact. Wake up the people of Ukraine. The final goal of the American government and NATO is to put their missiles on the soil of Ukraine and aiming them at Russia, To all the Ukrainian people, the Americans and NATO are not interested in you. You are being used as their tools to get to their goal. Wake up.
And there were many of them, of these viewer comments on our Facebook page. Catherine Fedorov, I get a feeling from you that this is not so much a movement that ousted President Viktor Yanukovych, at least for the time being, that had to deal with moving to the EU, as to the promises of a cultural advantage that would create inside your society. Is that what I'm gathering from you? What has formed now to be this interim government, that now you're going to be freer in this society?
Yes, that's basically what we are fighting for. People, I mean, before people were fighting to join some kind of union, but since January, people are fighting so we can at least remain as the country Ukraine. That was basically our whole goal, that we are showing that we're not going to allow presidents like Yanukovych to be in our government. We're not going to allow people to come 5 minutes, stand on the stage, promote violence, and then while we are fighting for our country and dying, they're going back home and sleeping. I mean, that's basically what the whole thing about. They're basically saying that we are the violent protesters, we are the terrorists. That's not what it was all about. Basically, we have these leaders promoting violence, and then they go back home, and then they put all the focus on us, blaming us for our actions.
Well, President Putin, Edward Spanos, is looking at a situation where I'm guessing he's not only very angry at this point, but that he's going to need to contemplate the steps that he's going to take. One of them is supposedly maybe raising the gas prices. How do you see Putin acting in terms of what's developed now, especially for the Crimea region?
Well, what's going on with Russia is that you have a NATO basically surrounding of Russia, and the moving of missiles into Eastern Europe is designed to neutralize Russia's own capability. As I said, this is like a Cuba Missile Crisis in reverse, except maybe not Cuba, but Canada. And you're going to bring NATO up right to Russia's borders. So of course Russia's going to react. My concern is not what Russia does. My concern is what the United States is doing in provoking a confrontation that literally could have us in nuclear war within a matter of days. By backing a violent coup against it was a legitimate government. It was corrupt. I grant you it was a corrupt government, but it was legitimate, and the overthrow of it violated the Ukrainian constitution, was not legal, and in fact, the studies I've seen, a majority of the Ukrainian people would be in favor of a customs union with Russia and Belarus as opposed to the European Union. All you have to do is look at Greece or Portugal and see what the future is with the European Union.
Catherine Fedorov, do you agree with the part that... well, go ahead if you have a comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do understand what he's saying, and I do agree to a certain extent of what he's saying, but that is... What we do want is Slavic unity. We want to unite with our Slavic brothers and sisters, but we want to remain as Ukraine. We want to be known as not Russians, but Ukrainians, because honestly, there were some Americans who were asking me, is Ukraine a state in America, or is Ukraine a city in Russia? People didn't know that the country Ukraine existed, and that's very sad. And yes, people do want Slavic unity, and what people don't get, that we wouldn't join the European Union. The whole thing that we would sign a trade agreement, the whole thing that we were going to sign an association, and only after 7 or 10 years would we have the opportunity to join the European Union. And of course I understand Russia's reaction if they're going to bring missiles or basically provoke Russia, but that's not what we want. We don't want America. We don't want America basically to interfere with us. That's not what we want. All we want is to live in a better country without corruption. We want the best for our people. Most people aren't aware of the consequences or the disadvantages of the European Union. People don't understand what's going on in Greece and Bulgaria and Latvia. Nobody understands what's going on in there. People just see these movies about people living fancy lives, and they think that if we join the European Union, that it's going to be like perfect. I believe that if we want to change something, we should start from ourselves. That's what I've always been promoting. I haven't been promoting violence. I've been promoting that we should start change from ourselves. We should focus on our own flaws, and only after that we can make a global difference.
Well, Edward Spanos, Putin is not going to let go of Ukraine that easily. And if this were a chess game, who's going to make the next move here? Russia, or are we talking U.S., perhaps U.S. NATO?
Well, I wouldn't look at it that way. I would look at the danger of a confrontation coming up very, very quickly, which has been building for weeks and weeks and weeks. And again, I stress, why is the United States supporting the illegal overthrow of an elected government? It was corrupt, but it was an elected government. These were the violent takeover of government buildings. These were armed protesters. I've seen the videos. These were not, there were maybe many of the people were peaceful, but the thing was driven by guys in masks, with guns, with chains, with Nazi emblems on their armbands. I saw where the statues were taken down, and Nazi emblems, neo-Nazi symbols, were placed, were graffiti on the signs. I saw the U.S. Confederate flag in the Kiev City Hall, the Celtic cross, a symbol of white supremacy. This is not democracy. My country should not be supporting this.
Well, Catherine Fedorov, again, we're going back to this neo-Nazism. Do you think that it was okay for that to be part of the process to achieve some of the goals that some of the protesters wanted out there?
Definitely. First of all, before we use the term neo-Nazism, we have to understand what National Socialism means. Because I personally was there, and I know these National Socialists, and these are not the people who want basically to kill another group of people. What they want is to achieve mutual goals, and basically for men and women to do their responsibilities in order not for personal greed, but for the society to be as a whole. That's what they want. That's what, when they mean National Socialism, that is what they support. You can't compare the Nazis who were in the 1930s and 1940s to the National Socialists we have today. You can't just compare. They're different. It's not, they don't promote the same violence. They have different views. Just because they would label themselves as Nazis or National Socialists, that doesn't mean they follow all of Hitler's ideas or they agree to a great extent to everything that Hitler did. It is above all a nationalist revolution and not a national socialist. That's just their way of labeling things. And if you can see, Pravy Sektor, the right sector, uses a red and black flag and not a Hitler's flag. And
okay.
it is a sign of nationalism.
We got less than a minute left. I'm sorry to jump in.
That was the flag of the collaborationists.
Go ahead, Edward Spanos.
That was the flag of the Nazi collaborationists, the red and black banner. That was Bandera.
Yes, it was above all it's a nationalist thing. The black stands for the soil, the red stands for the blood.
Edward Spanos, 30 seconds or less. Is Russia going to move in Crimea to protect its naval fleet there?
I think they may do it. I think the best thing right now would be for Obama to leave the presidency. He should get out. The U.S. should stop meddling in affairs right there and stop supporting Svoboda and the right sector, stop supporting a neo-Nazi coup against what was a legitimate government. If they keep this up, we will end up in war.
Very well. We're going to end it there. Let me thank our guest, Ukrainian nationalist Catherine Fedorov, there talking to us from Kiev, and from the Executive Intelligence Review, Edward Spanos spoke to us from Washington. Any comments or suggestions, do send them at newsroom@presstv.ir. From me, Kaveh and the entire team here in the capital, Tehran, it's bye-bye.